So as we continue our discussion on Darkseid War, we pick up with the events following Batman's acquisition of the Mobius chair and ascension to godhood, and transition to a character named Kalibak. So longtime DC readers are well aware of who Kalibak is and the fact that he dates back to the original appearance of Darkseid in 1971 with Jack Kirby's first New Gods story. Now, where the original publications depicted Kalibak as the firstborn son whose mother was killed by Darkseid under Hegra, the mother of Darkseid, who looked to manipulate her son into taking over New Genesis, within the New 52, like Steppenwolf and Darkseid, Kalibak has not been provided a backstory. The only information we have on his character is that he's the son of Darkseid, but the identity of his mother is a mystery to us. Now, where Johns may or may not answer this question, in truth, I'd argue that because of the events that will transpire regarding his character, we don't really need to know any of this. But the introduction of Kalibak into this story comes by way of Steppenwolf, who's been sent to have Kalibak fight alongside the forces of Apokolips during their invasion of Earth. Now, the inclusion of Kalibak comes against the opinions of Steppenwolf, who views Darkseid's son as reckless and headstrong, with no real thought to how his actions impact the bigger picture. And what I mean here is that during the events of Earth 2 World's End, when the forces of Apokolips invaded the Earth 2 continuity, when the battle unfolded, Kalibak showed no concern for the forces of Apokolips and often decimated the men of his own ranks in order to attack those he considered foes. As a result, he often creates panic on the battlefield, destroying the battle plans of Steppenwolf. Something I'd also like you to notice here is that Kalibak is allowed a little more leeway regarding his view of Darkseid, in that despite his actions of disobeying the orders of Steppenwolf on the battlefield, he's still allowed to join the fight against the Anti-Monitor. Now, a question I would ask here is whether Kalibak's attendance is due to the fact that he's Darkseid's son, or because Darkseid recognizes the threat that Anti-Monitor presents and is quite literally pulling out all the stops in an attempt to ensure victory. But regardless of the reasons, the fact remains that because of his bloodlust combined with his vast strength and combat prowess, Kalibak is an asset for virtually whoever he's fighting for. From here, we jump back to Batman and his acquisition of the Mobius chair. Now, something I really enjoyed about this particular moment is that John seems to be presenting the Mobius chair to be as much of a drug as a source of information. What I mean here is that like Gollum and Bilbo Baggins from The Lord of the Rings, who were obsessed with the One Ring and needed it both emotionally and physically, Batman's conversation with the League provides the same sentiment with his character. Where this conversation reveals that the Mobius chair does not know the identity of the Anti-Monitor, Batman also says things like he needs the chair and that it provides information that they couldn't get any other way. In addition to this, Hal Jordan offers to use his lantern ring as an alternative to Batman's direct interaction with the chair, but the offer is declined in lieu of the claim that Bruce has more interaction with Darkseid and Apokolips than anyone else. Now, this particular instance is a reference to the Robin Rises story in the New 52, where Bruce traveled to Apokolips following the death of his son Damian in an effort to reclaim his body. Because the story saw him traversing his way through Apokolips and eventually confronting Darkseid, Batman's journey gave him first-hand experience on Darkseid and Apokolips in a way that no one else has. From here, we travel back to Apokolips with Superman and Lex Luthor. Now, in the New 52, Superman's own experience in Apokolips happened during the first arc of the Justice League during Darkseid's appearance and his battle with the League. Because Clark had spent a limited amount of time here in the form of a couple minutes or less, he has no real understanding of how this location affects his powers. And so what Johns does here is provide us with the full measure of what Superman is capable of. As the two make their way through the landscape, because the only way to travel back to Earth is by way of a mother box which acts as a teleporter between Apokolips and the rest of the multiverse, where the two investigate the area, they also learn that Superman's X-ray vision doesn't work. In addition to this, because Darkseid had informed his slaves that whoever kills Superman will receive their freedom, both Lex and Clark are set upon by an army of slaves vying for the opportunity to be free. Now, the battle between Superman and Lex against the slaves is very important for their characters, not because of the slaves themselves, but because it highlights a fundamental difference between Clark and Lex. For Superman, the slaves of this world aren't there by choice and are simply the inhabitants of conquered worlds by way of Darkseid's forces. As such, their actions of attacking are out of desperation to escape their hellish existence, more so than out of malice. However, for Lex, there is no real differentiation between the inhabitants of this world and the being who rules it, and instead, he believes they are all guilty and should be punished accordingly. However, at the conclusion of the fight, the reason for why Superman's X-ray vision didn't work is revealed to be due to the fact that Apokolips has no sunlight, meaning that Superman can be killed while he's here. Now, the most logical question to ask is that if there's no sunlight, how is it that Superman was able to use super strength in his fight against the slaves? To be honest, I would argue that the lack of sunlight simply keeps Superman from recharging, and that like a battery, Superman will retain his abilities until he simply runs out of juice, so to speak. From here, we jump back to Earth with Grail and the Anti-Monitor. Because the goal of Darkseid was to locate Marina Black for the purpose of finding Grail, The actions of Grail in this moment effectively create a shortcut. Using a pentagram of sorts and invoking Amazonian magic, her goal is to keep her into the bargain with Anti-Monitor by making her location known to Darkseid, luring him to Earth, where the Anti-Monitor lies in wait. Now, transitioning back to Batman and the League, the conversation between the group and their hunt for answers in this section actually covers information that we already have, but their questions range from how Grail was able to use Barry Allen as a dimensional doorway, to how she was able to open a portal for Anti-Monitor using the ring of Jessica Cruz. Now, where Batman doesn't answer these questions and instead chooses to answer Wonder Woman's question on the history of Grail and Marina Black, the use of Barry Allen and Jessica's ring will eventually serve as a subplot later in the story. But before any of them can continue, the group is met with the arrival of Scott Free. Now, the situation as it appears to the eyes of Scott is of both intrigue and cynicism. What I mean here is that because Metron had used Scott as a bargaining chip in brokering peace between Darkseid and Highfather, Scott harbors no love for Metron. However, the fact that he has been removed from his chair and replaced by Batman begs the question of how and why this happened. Now, where Metron states that this was done against his will, Scott makes the case that it may have all transpired as a result of the plan that Metron has set in motion. However, rather than providing us with an answer to whether or not this is all truly the plan of Metron, instead, John shifts the focus of the story to the arrival of Darkseid. Because Scott realizes that a battle between Darkseid and Anti-Monitor would lay waste to the planet and possibly the universe itself, and because the League does not possess the knowledge or power to defeat Anti-Monitor, the only option they have is to force Anti-Monitor to leave. Now, something to keep in mind here is that from the perspective of Scott, the League were able to force Darkseid out of their reality in their initial conflict. However, the ending of their first battle with Darkseid came when Cyborg hacked into a mother box and used it to teleport Darkseid away. However, Darkseid could have returned at any point and destroyed the planet's inhabitants, but because his only interest was in finding Grail, he simply left the planet alone since he didn't believe that she was there. What this means is that Scott is basically operating on incomplete information, and that the situation as it's unfolding cannot be stopped. And so with Batman taking to the multiverse in an effort to find a way to stop the Anti-Monitor, the scene transitions back to Apokolips with Lex Luthor and Superman. Now, what's interesting about this particular point in time is that with Superman being virtually powerless due to the lack of a yellow sun, his life is literally in the hands of Lex Luthor. Because of this, Superman has to resist his normal urge to distrust Lex and instead must place his trust in him for his own survival. From here, the story begins to move into this series of moments with an overarching narration by Wonder Woman. With the Justice League teleporting to the Anti-Monitor as he awaits the arrival of Darkseid, we get a bit more banter between Grail and Wonder Woman. While this isn't really important, this is really just John's providing a little more context to the dichotomy between the two, in that Grail's being depicted as the antithesis to Wonder Woman regarding her views on life and her role in the DC Pantheon. What I mean here is that where Wonder Woman serves to ensure the protection of life and truly operates as a catalyst for the Amazonian mission to protect the world, Grail stands as a daughter of Marina who looked to achieve the same goal, but raised her daughter for a darker purpose. What Johns is doing here is juxtaposing the two together and saying that they both want the same thing, but like the path of the Jedi and the Sith from the Star Wars universe, the two are going about them in completely separate ways. And so with Darkseid arriving due to Grail invoking an Amazonian ritual, Jessica Cruz asks the question of who they should fight. At this point, Johns provides one of the best monologues that I've ever seen in a comic. Using Greek mythology as a basis, Wonder Woman tells us the story of Odysseus, Charybdis, and Scylla. In Homer's epic poem Odyssey, Odysseus spent 10 years attempting to return home following his involvement in the Trojan War. During this time, he encountered all manner of Greek gods and monsters, some of whom were benign, while others were malicious. During his journey, he encountered Charybdis and Scylla during his attempt to cross through the Strait of Messina. According to legend, on one side of the strait sat Charybdis, who was hidden beneath the water but created whirlpools with giant teeth that would swallow men and ship alike. On the other side sat Scylla, a six-headed monster who would grab men from their boats and consume them. When Odysseus was forced to make his way through the Strait of Messina, in the end, he had to choose one side knowing that there was no way to cross without taking some kind of loss to the ranks of his men. Using this as a metaphor, what Johns tells us is that Darkseid and Anti-Monitor represent these respective monsters, with the Justice League operating as travelers, and that no matter what side they choose, whether it be Darkseid or Anti-Monitor, there's no way to escape the situation without suffering some kind of loss. And so as the story begins to come to a close, Lex Luthor realizes that the fires of Apokolips are effectively solar pits, and that in order for Superman and himself to survive the situation, Clark will have to be dropped inside to recharge his energies. And so committing to this act and dropping Clark inside, as Lex is surrounded by slaves attempting to claim his life, Superman emerges as the God of Steel. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and let me know what you guys think about the story so far. and I will catch you guys later. Peace.